This meeting is being live streamed and recorded. The recording of this meeting will be posted on the district website as soon as possible. Okay, is there a motion to approve the agenda as presented? Moved by Amy, second by Jeff. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion carries. We have one item for discussion, and this is the fiscal year 2022 audit results and presentation. Welcome, Craig, presenting the fiscal year audit for 2021-2022.
Well, good morning. This is usually I'm saying good evening, but yep, sure can. Is it coming through good? All right, there we go. I'm Craig Popenhagen. I'm the principal on your audit, and we'll just kind of run through the slide deck here and kind of give you the highlights of the 2022 audit. Financial statements, we issued a clean report. So basically, we're comfortable that the numbers and are fairly stated in accordance with accounting principles in all material respects. We've received all the support and everything that we asked for during the course of the audit. Very clean report for you. Internal controls are functioning properly. No findings there. Compliance, also a good report. No findings on compliance. Minnesota legal compliance, some statutory testing that we do, or compliance with Minnesota statutes, at least a subset of those. That was good results there, no findings. The federal, what we call single audit, but basically what that refers to is federal grant program dollars that are flowing through the district. Busy year for those for 2022. So with that, about $6.7 million in total on federal funding. With the amount of the federal funding that you had, we tested or had to test compliance over 3 programs. So child nutrition, ESSER gear program, as well as the fiscal recovery funds. No findings there, so very good results. We had a little bit of extra enjoyment with a new accounting standard for leases. So that is reflected in your financial statements as well. This one's kind of a popular topic here this audit season. So there's a lease standard for governmental entities. There's also a lease standard for for-profit world and nonprofit world. So kind of across the board, it's a popular topic here. So that's reflected in your financials. Lots of changes with the standard setters. So in each of the next 3 upcoming school years, there's something new, at least to think about for potential changes in the financial statements. Probably the most, the one that's going to take the most effort is the next one, subscription-based information technology. What's being referred to there is software. So if you have software agreements that span a period longer than 12 months, there will be some additional accounting there. Those will hit the financial statements in the form of an asset and a liability to, basically make the payments on your software subscription. So that'll be coming up in the next fiscal year. It's going to look and feel pretty similar to the lease standard that was implemented this year. The reason being is almost literally the standard setters took the lease standard and did a search and replace for the software verbiage. So get into some numbers here for you. So in the general fund, the highlights here, $59.8 million in revenue coming in, just under $62.8 million in expenditures going out. So that's about a $2.9 million reduction in fund balance that was budgeted. So you did have a budgeted decrease in fund balance. So kind of left to right on this slide. On the left is the most fund balance that has the least amount of restrictions to it. So non-spendable, assigned, unassigned. Basically, these are discretionary funds to use how you see fit or to not to. You can choose to do that as well. But about $13.3 million. Classroom type related restrictions, about $500,000 in fund balance carrying forward. And then a couple capital categories. Operating capital is about $250,000, and then long-term facilities maintenance, just over or under $1.1 million. So if we kind of slice and dice where the funding came from in total, revenues coming in kind of that $59 million mark, and about 66% coming through the Minnesota Department of Education. So state controlled. Federal was just under 6%. Again, that's that $6.7 million in federal funding. Had a lot of COVID money coming through this year, about $3 million. Property taxes, you have really good support from the community and your property owners for your operations. Property taxes, about 25% of your total sources coming into the general fund. In this graph, let's see, we got the prior years as well, but percentage wise, almost identical over the 2 years. Both years had a good amount of federal COVID dollars coming through, 22 and 21. This slide is 2022 expenditures. So that's 62.8 million. So kind of looking at what we spent money on. Pretty neat thing to talk about here is just over 80% is classroom and instruction related. So classroom and student support. So that's a pretty high percentage. Let's see, otherwise administration and district support, if you put those two together, that's about under 7%. So that means you're running very efficient and making efficient use of your taxpayer dollars here, with about a 7% ratio on administration is all. So and delivering good results, very clean audit to go along with that. Previous year was about 59 million in expenditures. Your classroom related percentage a year ago was about 78%. So a year ago, there were some capital related items that were not directly correlated into the classroom. So that was kind of the difference really in the percentages, 21 compared to 22. Your enrollment trend, enrollment kind of slowly trending downward a little bit over time. I know that's something that you're looking at, and kind of looking at going forward, keeping an eye on that with your expenditures. Food service, let's see, that's about all I had to talk about on general fund. So just the last couple slides here, a couple other funds. So one is food service. So with the food service fund, you see a pretty sizable increase in fund balance here, carrying forward into the 22-23 school year. So about $1.1 million. The increase here, we've been seeing this pretty much across the board with our school district audits this fall, as well as has the Department of Education at the state. And the reason for that is with the free meals program to students and families, all students got free meals again in 2022. That was a few different programs funding that. The reimbursement rates from those federal programs in 2022 were the reimbursement rate per meal was higher than is compared to if you were just running a normal free and reduced meal program. So with those higher reimbursement rates, that did add to fund balance. So in September, the Department of Education was seeing this trend as well. And basically they doubled your permitted carryover of fund balance from one year to another. So prior to September, like in 2021 fiscal year end, the permitted fund balance carryover was about 3 months of expenditures. September here, this fall, they doubled that to 6 months. So with that increased federal kind of reimbursement rates and the build or the increase in fund balances, they want you to, come up with a plan on how you're going to use that, but they want you to make good and thoughtful use of that money, but it is available for use within the food service program. And then community education, kind of back to normal operations for 2022, schools being open, able to have programs, community education programs and things like that. So you're able to do kind of businesses as usual in 2022, whereas, the end of 2020 and all of 2021, you're pretty much shut down or restricted because of COVID as to what you could do. So that's been a pretty common chart that we've seen in our school district audits this fall as well, is that the community education programs are doing much better after COVID or post-COVID. So that is what I have for prepared remarks for you this morning. I'd entertain questions if there are any, and I'll turn the meeting back to you folks.
Thank you, Craig. Okay, okay.
Could I make just a couple of comments before you ask questions? So one thing I just want to add on the community ed fund balance is they did a significant amount of work obtaining childcare stabilization federal funding. And that was a big piece of that fund balance as well, to help stabilize the licensed daycare and our school age care program. And so I just wanted to add that I believe they had over $400,000 of federal revenue for that program. And then the other thing I just want to point out on page 4 of your packet that I handed out, there is a section on there that says uncorrected misstatement. And I just want to call it out because it's different than prior years. So there was, we switched our software for community ed from our school today to LEO. And in that process, we realized that there were a few things that we weren't booking in the full way that we should have been. It was immaterial to the financial statements. So that's why it's still a clean audit and no findings. We've obviously corrected that moving forward with the new system. But I just wanted to call that out because that is different than the other audits that you've seen, just in case anyone were to ask you a question just about the way we book some of those items with the new software. So that is all I really wanted to add. So if you have questions, Craig or I can certainly answer them.
Thank you, Val. Any questions from the board members? Tom?
Thank you for the report, and thank you, Val, for an excellent financial situation. I just had a question and a comment. It's more in the weeds of in the packet that we got. On page 17, where it talked about capital assets, our construction in progress went from 5,500 to $2.6 million. And I was just curious what that was.
Sorry, that's the middle school roof.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Okay. And then on page 29 and 30, where it talks about the health insurance premiums and the payouts, it looked like the premiums were enough to cover the payouts more or less. And then there's the a little over $1 million, or about 11-12% cost to maintain the program. And there's probably reasons for that, but are there other models or something? Because $1 million, you could hire 10 people to do that, unless part of that is for the insurance that goes when we exceed the maximum amount.
So. Is it on? I keep shutting it off. Sorry. I have a cough, so I don't want to like accidentally cough into the microphone. So are you talking about the administration amount?
Right,
Yeah.
yeah.
So that administration, this is for health and dental, just to make sure that we're clear about that. That is what we pay to Medica and Delta Dental for running everything, processing the claims, sending people their medical cards, all of that part. And that also includes what we pay as a percentage to One Digital for helping us manage all of it and make sure we know what where we're at and what we're doing and making sure we're doing the best model. And it also does include our reinsurance or self-insurance stop loss premium.
Just curious, is that a common amount, 10 or 11, 12%? Or I mean, if we had twice as much, say $16 million, would it still be that $1 million, or is it a percentage of the amount?
Nope, it's not a percentage. So we pay, it's a dollar amount per member. So there's an admin fee per member. I don't know the dollar amount off the top of my head, but so if we have more participants in the plan, then obviously we have a higher fee. And I believe the One Digital is also per subscriber, I think is the term that they use. And so there's like a little additional for that. And the self-insurance is a flat fee that we go through at renewal time.
And given that our situation has changed, would it benefit the school district to work with other nonprofits in the area on a health insurance system, so that the overhead costs are shared and you're just paying premiums?
I'm not sure. I don't know if we're allowed to do that or not. We can certainly ask One Digital about kind of a cooperative model, but I would say that that's, in my mind, that's what we left was a
Right.
cooperative model. Because in years where we were doing well and others weren't, we were obviously helping share in that burden. But the cost to go back to a fully insured was a 30% increase this year. We did get a quote on that. And so it didn't make sense at this point, but it's certainly something we'll always look at if we need to.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Val, could you just talk about the HIDA process with that as well, in terms of that administration cost is something that the companies bid on? So could you just talk about that? I think that's important.
Yeah. Yep, sure. So we are required by statute every 2 years to go out and solicit bids for the self-insurance. So HIDA is the Health Insurance Transparency Act. And so every 2 years we say, hey, we're looking for a healthcare provider, a dental provider. It's actually all of our benefit programs. And then we open the bids, and then we actually are allowed to go back. And so if we had a low bid, but it wasn't Medica, it's a lot of work to switch carriers. And so we prefer to stay with the same carrier. And so we might take that low bid to Medica and say, hey, we had another bidder that came in $300,000 lower on, stop loss. Can you match? And then they do a second bid round, which is their best and final. And that has actually benefited the district pretty significantly over the last, I would say 6 to 8 years it's been around. Because we do see a lot of movement from time to time, not always. There was less movement this round, but Medica did come in with a really solid offer comparatively to the other bidders. So that is a process. We actually did do it 2 years in a row, which is not required, just with this current health situation that we're working through. But Medica did have the best offer for this round. Is that what you're looking for?
Thank you. Any other questions? Amy?
Thank you for your presentation and for all the good news. I have a question about slides 7 and 8, which are both labeled general fund expenditures by program fiscal year ended June 30th, 2021. And I'm wondering if one of them is actually 2022 and
Yep. So let me just back up here. So the first one, the $62
is
million
2022.
one is 2022. Yep.
That's what I thought, but
Yep.
I was,
And if we could get a corrected slide deck so we can update the packet.
Posted. Yep.
and then I know our district does such a good job being financial stewards. I was hoping that you could expound on what a good job we do, especially Val, and sort of comparing, clean audits, what percentage of school districts have clean audits, maybe looking at our general fund revenue by sources and, comparing that to just any good things I would love to hear. Please tell us about our
right.
administration.
So let's kind of we'll start with the administration and district support. So that's about 6.3% combined. Typically what we see is a range from about 8% to 10% going to administration and district support. So that's pretty normal, typically. So you're certainly below that range and still, keeping good control of your operations, making good, efficient use of that taxpayer dollar there. The sources of funding, your community support here from your property owners is very strong. They have approved additional levies on their property taxes relative to what we see in other districts. So I think property tax support generally is about maybe 18% or so. So you've got very good support from your community. With the increase in the federal programs, that brings along with it some additional compliance to keep track of. So that's good that you come through with clean reports on the compliance. And as far as having no findings, very, very few of our clients across the board would have no findings, especially when it comes to financial reporting. So a normal finding with most of our clients is, that if we draft or prepare the financial statements, which we do, and pretty much most of the time, very few of those would be able to not have a finding with that. So since you have a recovering CPA on staff, it certainly helps you avoid that finding. And we provide a draft of the statements and stuff to Val before we issue final form, and she does a very good job of reviewing those. She goes through what we call our gap checklist, or our accounting checklist, which is, how many hundreds of rows is it, Val? It's quite a few.
It is roughly 1,400.
Yeah.
I looked.
So anyway, so that's kind of uncommon to have that kind of talent in-house to be able to do that. So very good results.
Thank you, and many thanks to Val for keeping us on track another year, and I'm so glad you're part of our administration.
Any other questions or comments? Corey?
Thanks for being here, Craig. How many school district clients do you perform audits for or financial statements for? Your firm does, I mean.
Oh, boy. Hundreds across the country.
How many in Minnesota?
Probably 45 or 50 or so.
Okay. For a follow-up on the general fund expenditures, I appreciate your comment about the lower percentage we have for administration. That's a point of pride for our administration team here. When it looks at the classroom, we're at 80.6 for instruction dollars. I'm assuming that's high compared to a lot of your other clients. Do you know a ballpark where it would fall for amount of money that's spent specifically on classrooms?
So normally for classroom and student support, it's about 76 to 78% of the total for the general fund. Yep.
Thank you. Great questions. Anyone else? Questions or comments? Dr. Hillman?
I just have a couple of comments here. As said, we need to be thankful for Val, and it's not, it's Val's leadership, right? And it's about the systems that Val has put in place that allows the finance department to get these results year in and year out. This is not like a unicorn, right? How many years in a row have we heard this, that no findings, no findings, no findings? And to me, this year, with the amount of federal funds that were in and out, and with the regulations that went with those, that sometimes changed, actually not sometimes, almost always changed in the middle. I love sports analogies, and so a clean audit this year to me is the equivalent of going 17-0 in an NFL season and winning the Super Bowl. So this is a pretty big deal, and I think the community just needs to stop and think about that. I do want to point out there's a lot of good news in terms of our financial processes, but I do want to quantify a couple of items, and I'd like to call out. We've talked declining enrollment, and I had some really good feedback saying, Matt, that's inside baseball, right? It's people understand that you talk about declining enrollment, but let's just take a look at the graph. So since 2018-19, we are down 190 students. Let's put that into revenue. If we just use we usually use a round number of $10,000 per student. That's $1.9 million less in revenue that we are receiving every year. And you might say, well, 190 students, you should be able to divide that by 20 and maybe you can cut 9 or 10 people. Well, that's not the way it works, right? You've got 13 different grade levels, right? Some students who are able to stay beyond, age 18 after they've graduated for additional services. So if you think about that, around 190 students over 13 grade levels, you cannot really adjust your overhead all that much. So I share this because I would like Craig just to comment on the challenge that declining enrollment presents districts. And I'm using it as a call to action for us as we come into a legislative session with $17 billion in surplus, that we really need to be active as a community, asking the legislature to do some fully funding of education. And people say, well, what is fully funding of education? It's very simple to me. It's two pieces. We're going to make sure that we eliminate the special education cross subsidy, which for us would have brought us, we need about $5 million to do that. And in addition, tying the formula to inflation. To me, when you ask me to define that, those are the two things. So Craig, I would just like you and we are well managed financially. You've said that over and over. We have a healthy fund balance despite us spending it down. But can you please just explain from your perspective about how you see this kind of declining enrollment impacting districts that you have served?
Yeah, so basically the declining enrollment trend, it's real because each student, as you're aware, brings with them about $10,000 in, state funding. That's just how the funding formula works. It's enrollment driven for the most part. So when the enrollment is trending downward, luckily you don't have, steep declines, but at the same time, your largest expense is people. So people don't, they want more than a 2% raise or expect more than a 2% raise each year, right? Which, kind of the formula rate from the state has been, they've been trying to put more money out to the school districts, but it's about 1.5%, 2% increase in the formula rate per year, right? So when your inflation is going like this year to the tune of about 7%, and you're getting a 1% increase in your rate, but trending downward in enrollment, you're going to have kind of a budget imbalance. It's somewhere along the way that you have to keep track of. And, unfortunately or unfortunately, many districts are forced to look at what programming, are we doing? And is there programming that, needs to be trimmed out? And where do you find those cost reductions to bring your cost back in balance with your funding?
And just pointing out too, we've been projecting this declining enrollment, now 190 students in the last 4 years for some time, right? This is a demographic study that we've been trying to put the district in position to be able to have a soft landing, if you will, to meter out to what is the new normal. So this isn't people fleeing the system, right? This is a lower amount of birth rates. We just have fewer kindergartners enrolling versus those kids who are graduating. Recently saw the enrollment options report. You see, we are still very strong performers in recruiting students from other school districts to attend here. But this is going to be a major piece for, so while we're very well managed financially, this is something we just need to all keep the eye on the ball and making sure how we adjust to meet that. I have one more comment, if I might. I've read and heard quite a few comments, both in Minnesota and nationally, with criticism or a complete misunderstanding of COVID federal relief dollars. In fact, when school districts talk about some of the financial issues that are facing us, our biggest is the 190 student declining enrollment in the last 4 years, to be clear. People will often say, I think glibly, well, what did you do with all that COVID money, right? You've got COVID money coming out of your ears. What did you do with that? Because there's no plan. And if you did get it, maybe you wasted it. And I'd like Craig to comment on, that's not allowed. I mean, in Minnesota, in Northfield specifically, we're going to bring it to Northfield. You know how we have spent our COVID dollars. We've been very planful in doing so. You invested in additional school counselors. And last week we saw a report from the Minnesota Student Surveys that's saying that our students' mental health, the headline was in crisis, right? We've got some different local data that is helping us understand what the local circumstances, but you invested in additional school counselors. You invested in additional contribution to our health insurance so that our employees' health insurance premiums didn't skyrocket at the same time that they were doing some of the most difficult public service that educators will do in our entire lifetime. You made sure to backfill our revenue loss due to that decline in enrollment so that we could maintain smaller class sizes as identified as one of the top priorities by almost a 75 member task force. And we paid for COVID related expenses, things like overtime for our custodians to make sure that things were cleaned properly, substantially increased substitute costs, other kinds of things that were needed to be able to continue to maintain our operations during COVID. So Craig, I give that as an example. I would like, you said over 40 school district audits in Minnesota. There's this narrative that can sometimes be shared about how schools have, not used all their COVID dollars or they have wasted. I'd like you to talk about how untrue that is, because many districts are using it for the things that we shared and more. Yes, there might be a one-off here and there about how a district in another state may have used it for some facility kinds of things. But here we have used it really to try to maintain financial stability. Could you please comment on that?
Certainly. So with the COVID funding, pretty much across the board, you had to have a plan for what you were going to spend the money on before you got it. And it had to be approved by the Department of Education, set up and budgeted through their systems as well, so that they knew what your plan was for the spending. So, absent a plan, you didn't get the money, you wouldn't be able to use the money. And kind of the spending priorities kind of evolved over the course of COVID. So, at the end of 2020, going into the 2021 school year, a lot of it was, we need to have infrastructure to do distance learning, not in person, right? Because being in class for many was not an option. So that took infrastructure. And you saw a lot of kind of capital related spending in that first year just to facilitate a learning environment during COVID lockdowns. Going into the 2022 year, it was more, we got to get students, back into the classroom. Let's prepare to have, let's prepare for that. And then also address, the unfortunate kind of learning loss that didn't happen because of distance learning and because it just wasn't as effective. So those are real. It took people, it took, we had the whole social distancing thing to work out that influence class sizes and how many kids could be in the building and all of that stuff. So those are kind of the, big picture wise, the costs and the issues that you had to address to even, bring students back into the building.
So and again, Craig, as he was talking, reminded me of two other things. There's many buckets of COVID relief funding, right? Craig mentioned learning loss. One of the areas that we have invested the dollars that are required to be spent on learning loss is investing in many of our teachers taking that letters training, right? Which we know is so powerful and the research supports. And then the other part about the after school program, the after specific money that was required for after school programming, those are the COVID relief dollars that we use to expand our really successful community school program from Greenville Park to our other two elementaries. So I understand this took a few extra minutes, but I just think this is really important that when we are talking with folks in the community about the financial challenges that face not just Northfield schools, but all school districts in the state over the next year, there is this part about, well, what did you do with that money? Well, we used it. It was required to be planned on how to use it, had to be approved. I can tell you from the emails that we get that they are reviewing everything. The folks we get emails at 11 o'clock at night saying, hey, you need to change this part of the budget because it didn't, very small, detailed kinds of things. So for folks who read that narrative on social media, it just is not true. And we ask you to take a look at this video. We ask you to take a look at this audit to show how well the dollars have been used and that they've been used in the way that were appropriately spent to pass the federal audit, right? That's a trick, right? Because there's a lot of rules. And again, 0 findings. So I share this with you just so that you are armed with ready for people in the community as you talk with them when we come into this legislative session and are asking for more sustainable funding, that you are ready for this particular part. So thank you for indulging me.
Thank you. Any other comments? Yes, Tom.
2 quick ones. So the initial packet we had was all draft. Will there'll be a final one, and will that be accessible online?
Yeah, so we publish all of our audit documents. You can go back, probably 10 years, pretty close. So they'll be on the finance department website, and then we'll also include this as an updated packet in the, we didn't really have a table file, but we'll include it on the website as well.
Okay. Then a question, you're talking about tying the formula for inflation. Would that go back to some point when we didn't start losing, like 2010 or something, or would you be happy with just today?
I think most likely what would be proposed to be today. And if you care to know, I prefer the implicit price deflator as the inflationary index versus the CPI.
Okay. Amy.
I just have a small question for Val. I remember in past years, there was always a question about the student activity fundraisers and how that money was processed that would come up. And how did you fix that? Because that didn't come up this year.
So 2 or 3 years ago now, you might remember the specific 3. All right. They required the student activities to be part of the general fund. And so we had to roll everything into the general fund. And so it's, it was already following all of the same processes, but it's part of the general fund now. So they're not doing a separate student activity audit. So because it's in the global picture of the general fund, it's not as a precise item that they're looking for. So they don't have to report specifically on it anymore.
That was changed by the legislature or with
The GASB, so the Governmental Accounting Standards Board.
Yep,
Right.
standard setters, it was GASB statement 84. So it would have been in I think the 2020 year when we had to do that. So you saw, kind of a little bit of a fund balance jump in the general fund in that year of adoption. So.
But it probably made lots of school districts happy because everyone had that same problem.
Yeah. It did simplify, I think, the oversight. And then, of course, there's, additional account coding that comes along with it from the Department of Education. But all of that activity is, it's tracked and coded out separately. So you can look in your accounting system, you know how much revenues came in specific to student activities, you know, exactly what they spent money on, and you know how much is left over to carry forward and use next year. So.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Okay, very good. Thank you, Craig, for your
Very good.
prepared remarks and your
Thank you.
insight and expertise. Thank you, Val.
Thanks.
Okay, we are going to move to items for individual action and like to hear if there's a motion to approve the 2021-2022 audit reports as presented. Moved by Amy, second. By Cory, thank you. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion passes. Thank you, Craig. Okay, our future meetings are January 9th, 2023, 6 p.m. It's an organizational board meeting followed by the regular board meeting. It'll be held here in the district office boardroom. We'll also have a meeting January 23rd, 6 p.m. And that is all the business that we have for today. Thank you everyone for being here. Is there a motion to adjourn? Moved by Jeff, second. Second by Tom. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We are adjourned.